to another episode of Coffee with Alissa. Today is our fourth and final session in the Behavioral Finance series, and we'll be discussing finance and children. I'd like to welcome back licensed therapist Nancy Bells. Nancy, thanks for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So why do you think it's important to teach children about finance?
Well, I think as we know, having an understanding about money and finance is really crucial in adult living. And, many adult children will reference back that they wish that their parents had taught them more about money or modeled different behaviors around money and finance. And as we talked about last time, financial personalities really get their earliest roots in childhood. So it's pretty important. But I would also say that many parents are reluctant to talk about money and finance with their children, and they often miss what would be good, healthy teaching moments as they're raising their kids.
And why do you think this is so, like the reluctance that people have with talking about money with their children?
I think there can be a lot of different reasons, but some of what I hear at times is that some parents don't necessarily feel that it's important to be exposing their kids to that as they're growing up, or they don't think it's their responsibility. They think they might get this at school or later on. Some parents don't feel equipped to teach about some of those basic things with finance. Some parents actually don't have good, solid, their own practices around finances and money and budgeting, so they don't want to draw their children's attention to it. And they might feel that they're being hypocritical to say, do as I tell you, but not as I do. And one of the big ones too, I often hear is that I don't want my children to be fearful or to worry about money. And that stops them from having discussions.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot, whether it's money or other things. It's that fear of invoking fear in a child, but I think oftentimes not exposing them or, talking about them in the process, it actually creates more fear.
It does, because often what we're doing is we're projecting some of our own worry and believing they're having it,
Yes. As you're teaching children about money and finances, how do you avoid that fearfulness or unnecessary worry that could come up as a result?
The main thing is that I encourage parents to create, by their actions and by their words, a belief that our family is safe from a financial perspective. That we are safe, we will be okay, so that you're not burdening them with some of the things you need to take care of as the parent for the family. And so an example of how this might work is to say, hey kiddos, we're going to be fine and okay, but with me not working now, we might cut back on some of our spending, but we're going to be fine. I don't want you to worry about that. The other thing that I really encourage is to be open to questions about money and finances. So often when a kid will ask a question, let's say, oh, Mom, why is gas so expensive these days? And Mom might say, oh, honey, you don't need to worry about that. And instead, that's really an opportunity to understand why they're even asking that question. What's on their mind? Maybe we can share a little bit about it. And often it's the case that they're just curious. They're not even worried about it, Mm-hmm. And if telling somebody to not worry about something would stop worry, we won't need any more therapists anymore, probably.
Yes, right. Well, in addition to, not creating worry or anxiety for children around finances, do you have any other classic don'ts or things that parents should avoid doing?
Of course, I have quite a few, but let me hit on some. One of my main ones is to really watch the unhelpful sayings that we use that might be meaningful for adults, but that don't mean much to kids. And some of these are like, money doesn't grow on trees. I'm not made of money. If we keep spending like this, we're going to be in the poorhouse. We need to tighten our belts. I realized how they sneak in these sayings. So last week I mentioned to my grandson, hey, you can't have a second ice cream sandwich because I don't want to spoil you. And then I thought, spoil you? And I said, do you know what spoil means? And he said, isn't that when you leave something in the refrigerator for too long and it starts to smell? And so I realized I'm not going to use that phrase anymore, So just watch that. And that we do it all the time.
Yeah, you forget that they take things very literally versus, figuratively, like we mean.
And the thing think it's actually, some of them are generational too, so we can't
Yes.
even be using it with some younger adults these days, so just watch that. Second one is don't lecture. Often we're trying to look for teaching moments, but then if we try and project this into a lecture about when you're 23, they're going to stop listening. It's just repeated exposure to concepts. Next one is, I was introduced to this saying when my kids were young, and I loved it, is don't bawl them out and then bail them out. So we don't want to buffer them from the consequences of their actions or decision making. But a lot of parents will say, I can't believe you did this. Now I'm going to have to go get you a new phone. So you bawl them out and you bail them out. Is to just be careful about allowing consequences to happen. And with that, with consequences too, is to not assume that you should cover the consequences if there's a bad outcome and it wasn't the kid's fault. Because those things happen to us as adults. If we have an accident and there's a deductible, we don't get off the hook because it wasn't our fault necessarily, depending. So it's just a teachable moment there too. But I would say, so don't bawl them out and bail them out, but guide them. You're there to help them understand how to traverse the adult world. And quick example with that one is like, so let's say you get a call from your 18-year-old that they parked the car in the city in the wrong spot and it got towed. And so, some parents would say, I can't believe you did this. We talked about this. Let me come down. I got my checkbook. I'm going to help you out. Rather would be, hey, is there a sign? Do you know where the car went? Can we figure this out? I can give you a ride, but then I'll have to have you take care of it, and same as we would do with a friend, that if my car got towed, I might call you and say, hey, can you give me a ride to the tow yard? But I wouldn't say, can you give me a ride to the tow yard and also pay my towing fee?
Yes. Yeah, that's a great example.
And so one thing I like to also say is that allowing your children to experience their consequences is not the same as parental punishment. Mm-hmm. But a lot of parents think that it is, that if I don't, that I'm punishing them if I don't fix this. And they're just two different things. Final don't fight with your spouse about money in front of the kids. Also be careful what conversations about money you carry on in front of the kids, because as we said before, they're sponges and they will add their own interpretation to what they hear. So just to be cautious with that.
Are there any specific do's for parents when they have conversations with their kids?
There's a do that I like for parents to do before they have conversations with their kids. Mm-hmm. And this is some of what we talked about with marriage and finance last time, is to really intentionally, as part of your discussion as a couple, is to talk about spending decisions related to the kids. To be intentional and in agreement about what spending you want to be doing for the kids throughout their lives, whether it be for activities, whether it be cell phones, electronics, cars, clothes, college, throughout their growing up, is to talk about and make sure you're on the same page before you start to have discussions with them. Otherwise, they'll do parent splitting. They'll know who to go to for what. Mm-hmm. At an age-appropriate level is to just be very open and conversational about finances and money, just as you go about everyday living. I mentioned like pumping gas, that you might even mention about the cost of gas or whatever, or even show them how a gas pump works. When you're at the grocery store, when you're menus at a restaurant, when you're planning a trip to Disney World. Just anywhere along the way, be open and conversational and let them see how you manage money. If you're paying a copay at a doctor's appointment and they say, I thought we had health insurance, is again, you don't pull out your health plan and explain it all to them. You do it at an age appropriate level. Is there something called a copay? You'll understand this a little bit later on. Couple more do's is to be really intentional about your perception of your relationship with your child and what you want for your child, and how that impacts the financial provisions you provide for them. And so, we never want to see, we love our children and we don't want to see them upset, but that doesn't mean that we pay for a lost cell phone. We want our children to have an opportunity to be social. So we can offer support for them, let's say to go to the homecoming dance. but that doesn't mean that it's unlimited spending and financial provisions will provide there. I've never met a parent that doesn't value education and want to pass that on to kids, but that doesn't mean that we will necessarily pay for a very expensive private school. Final do, and this has to do with being aware of your own upbringing and how that might impact some of your anchoring or perceptions with your own children. Because some of the things that can happen is that some people will say, well, my parents provided this for me, so I need to provide this for my kids. Or my parents didn't provide this for me, so I want to make sure my kids have it. Or, a final one there, some people might say, well, my parents didn't provide this for me, and it really taught me to value paying for my own college, so I'm going to have my kids pay for their own college. Your own upbringing might provide some insight about what you want to do, but don't get too deeply anchored to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And something you mentioned in a previous conversation too, that I think might fit under these dues is, how much choice we give our kids, especially when it comes to money, right? And allow them to practice decision making.
Yeah.
Right. And it kind of goes to that consequence thing where it's not the end of the world if they experience regret or a negative consequence.
I really appreciate you bringing that up. That's a very, very important thing. And it is, and you start small, as you let them make decisions on a smaller level. And it really is, because it's hard to make decisions sometimes. It's hard to pick what you want. And it can be exhilarating too. And also, regret is a wonderful teacher. And you want to start small, small decisions. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It is. I'm so grateful growing up that, obviously age appropriately, but my parents, gave us the appropriate tools for making decisions at those different stages. And it really helps in adulthood to not just be like stumped all the time.
Well, and it is, because it is hard making decisions, It really, really is. And to experience that, I have a lot of people say to me, I have so much trouble making decisions. I wish I was like everyone else. And I'll say, well, you are like everyone else. We all have a little bit of trouble making decisions.
So what are some of the goals when we're teaching and modeling healthy financial patterns and habits for children?
Yeah, I would say like the primary goal is through our teaching and our modeling behavior is to first of all, expose them to a general awareness of money and finance and how it is woven into everyday life, because it is, it's something. And so that they get experience with that, to give them also, help them to understand budgeting, planning, spending, savings, investing, things like debt, primarily around credit cards, sharing, whether it be with contributions to our churches or in the community or through gift giving. And then, as we were talking about with decision making, is to really help them have an understanding with decision making and to start early, really early, and keep it age appropriate. And there's a saying, little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems. We want to be practicing on the littler problems before we get to the bigger ones.
Yes, for sure. I think sometimes it's helpful to have some examples or ideas just of how we can help kids with this. So do you have any strategies that you typically suggest?
I do. I have a couple here, and these can be extended in the different age level things. The first one is to start early with kids with practices about being intentional about allocating money that's coming in. And initially when they're young, it's through gifts, but eventually it will be through earned income. And so a lot of parents have a practice that when gifts come in is that there is sort of a decision about our allocation. And often with little kids, it's in three categories. We have savings that gets put away. We have sharing that we use for our giveaways. And then we have current spending. And often with little kids, what they used to do is use mason jars. I have to imagine there's probably an app out on the web now that you can use instead, but it's just them seeing that visual there. And then when they get a little bit older and they have earned income, is to still continue with that pattern, but to be collaborative with them, so that it's combined decision making with them. And you may have some rules that you're setting in place that, you have to set some of this aside for for spending at college or whatever it is, and some of this for whatever. And then current spending, often when kids are old enough to earn income, is they actually have some current expenses. So if a kid is driving a car, their gas has to come out of the current spending, or whatever expenses they're responsible for. So I really think that's a good strategy, and it gives kids some play within that. My next strategy has to do with that decision-making thing that we were talking about, is to allocate some money to kids, and I sort of call it under the family plan, things that you would normally be paying for, and let them do some decision-making. And at the earliest age, the one that I think can be fun to work with is for preschoolers or grade school kids. Often we're driving them around, and they're with us a lot, and when we're in the grocery store, they want a candy bar. When we're at a gas station, they want a slushie. At swim lessons, they want a snack. And often what they can do, and this is one of those sayings I can use for you, but they won't understand, they can nickel and dime us. A kid would not know what nickel and diming is, but they can nickel and dime, and it creates conflict often at times. And so I've encouraged parents that they might set aside for the kid and let them know that they have a set amount, let's say $5 or $10 a month, and it's in an envelope, and that can be used for any of those special treats. And they get to pick how they want to use it, and again, it can be in the car, it can be in your purse. And so if they ask for a candy bar, you can say, well, do you have money in your envelope? And I had one parent that said to me, well, what if at the front end of the month, they spend all of their money that first day or two? I say, well, you'd probably encourage them not to do that, but if they really push on it, let them do it and experience regret. At the end of the month, if they have money left over, I say you can let it roll over into the next month's envelope, or if they want to put it to save towards something bigger in their savings jar, they can. Just a lot of different lessons in there, that I think can be good. Then I like to encourage playing that up with something like return to school supplies and clothing. That's an area where often you do that with your child, and I encourage, for the ones that are easy to shop with, is to maybe have a note card with the supplies we need for school, and then let's talk ahead what kind of clothes you need. So we might have 3 pairs of pants, 2 shirts, a pair of shoes, and when you go out shopping, you shop according to plan. And with little kids that don't have designer tastes and all that, it can usually be an item-based kind of thing. When your kids get a little bit older, and I remember this approach, like this would have been 15 years ago when my daughter was a teenager, and we went out to go shopping, and her first item, which was a pair of jeans that cost more than I would have ever considered paying for a pair of jeans, sort of wiped out the whole budget I had in mind. And I could have pushed back on it or whatever, but these were very important to her. And so from that point on, we set a back to school budget that was based on a dollar amount, that I would pay up to a particular dollar amount. So if there was something that was very important and very expensive, then that would be okay to buy that, but then they would understand where else they would have to cut back. So again, it's like we do in our adult life, So that's one. Those are, the allocation of money coming in, and then teaching them to spend money. Final thing is, especially as kids get older, is to be really clear and upfront about what you're willing to provide to them in some different arenas, and where if they want more, they can make that decision, but to be their spending. And some of these things, like I mentioned, like homecoming. Like a parent might say, hey, with homecoming, we'll buy your ticket and we'll give you a certain amount towards some of the expenses, but if you guys want to add more on, then we'll let you cover the rest of that. Another example might be like your teenage daughter going to the hair salon. Is, hey, I'll pay X amount towards this, but if you want highlights and all this kind of stuff, that I understand that, but that will be what you provide. And with this, though, is we want to create not any sense of scarcity, though. It's provision. Is that we're game to really help you, especially with needs. But some of the wants, you can figure out what you want and if you want to pay for it. I know kids that will pay for highlights if mom's put in the bill, but they won't foot the bill for highlights if it comes out of their own money.
Yes. They've gotten quite expensive.
Well, they have, and I'm just picking that as a silly example. I had one woman tell me, I didn't get highlights until I was 40. I can't believe I'm willing to pay for them for my 14-year-old daughter. And I said, well, why are you willing to pay for them for your 14-year-old daughter? Yeah. So those are just some ideas.
And this has all been so great. Do you have any final thoughts before we jump off?
I would say, you have an opportunity and a responsibility to teach and model healthy financial patterns and habits to your kids while they're growing up. But you may not see them fully adopt and integrate them while they're still at home. And that can be really distressing. Mm-hmm. And you got to be careful to pick your battles there, because you don't want it to be a great area of conflict. But if you use some of the things we've talked about, you plant seeds, you continue to model, and you don't fund their poor choices or buffer them from consequences, you're still doing the right stuff. And then, though, as children become independent adults, I want you to remember, people to remember, they're not 100% responsibility for their financial personality as an adult. That you played one role in it, but there's other factors that come in. And I have clients where they see their adult children making really, really poor financial decisions and having consequences as an adult. And it's distressing. But I still say to make sure that you don't bail them out unnecessarily, that you don't enable them in any way, and that you try to detach from that. But my final one, and this comes up with even more frequency, is that parents, their children get to be adult, they're independent, they're financially grounded, but they make choices that are different than what their parents would make. Okay. And that can cause parents some distress. I have parents that say, well, why would my kid buy a house that big? And I have someone say, well, why would my kid buy a house that small? And my main thing is I really encourage them to not express their disapproval to their child and to not offer unsolicited advice, because it will create distance in the relationship. And, and if you honor and respect those boundaries, there's a chance that your kid might come back and actually ask for your opinion and your help with something, which is a good thing.
Well, Nancy, thank you so much again, not just for today's interview, but for the last 3 as well. I've certainly enjoyed my conversations with you. I've learned so much. I'm sure our audience has as well.
Yeah.
So to our audience, if you haven't seen the other 3 videos in this series, please visit our YouTube channel to check them out. And I hope you have a great day.
Yeah. Thanks, Alissa.